Okay. So once again, good morning guys. Itong napaka-exciting na event para sa atin, para sa ating lahat dahil sa kauna-unahang pagkakataon sa ating movement ay magbibigyan natin ng pagkakataon na mapakinggan ang dalawang panig, mga martial law apologies or martial law apologies versus sa mga martial law critics. Yan, mapapakinggan natin yung okay, admit natin. Mapapakinggan natin yung side ng bawat isa. Kung ano nga ba yung mabuting naidulot at yung hindi rin magandang naidulot ng martial law. At bakit nga ba merong hanggang sa ngayon ay sumasaludo at sumasang-ayon sa pagdeklara ng martial law ng panahon ni President Marcos. At bakit nga ba meron ding mga tumututol hanggang ngayon sa controversial na topic na ito. So ngayon, bago natin sisimulan, I will present my slide. Ayan, so admit muna natin. Ayan. At ating tingnan ang magiging flow ng ating program. So, okay, check natin. Ayan. So first, na nagawa natin ngayon is yung greetings. Ayan. So good morning sa lahat. And next is explain natin muna yung house rules at may remind sa ating mga debaters. And third part is presentation of the issue. Fourth part is introduction of the speakers. So bibigyan natin ng pagkakataon na maipakilala ng bawat speakers ang kanilang mga sarili. And ang pinaka-exciting part natin, yung debate proper. And yung sixth part is yung forum na pagbibigyan natin ng pagkakataon ng ating audience na magtanong sa ating mga debaters. At yung last part, or second to the last part is yung voting part na makikita natin kung paano ba na-persuade ng ating mga debaters at speakers yung ating mga audience. So, bibigyan natin ng voting ang right na makapag-vote yung mga audience natin kung alin ba yung mas naging persuasive sa kanila. And of course, yung last part for memorabilia purposes is yung ating pictorial. So now, before ko i-explain yung house rule, mag-admit muna tayo ulit ng mga bagong pasok. Ayan, admit all. So, admit tayo ulit. So, yan. So, good morning once again sa mga bagong pasok. So, explanation ng ating house rule. So, number one, there are two teams, each consisting of three speakers. At the opening, each team will have their introductory speech to present their position. The affirmative must advocate everything required by the topic itself and vice versa. Ganun din sa ating negative or sa mga team anti. So, no revision of position of a team is permitted during the debate. So, yan. So, mahigpit na pinagbabawal yung mag-change sides. So, going back, i-admit natin itong bagong pasok. So, good morning once again sa ating bagong pasok. So, for the fourth part, after the opening, each speaker is questioned as soon as he concludes his constructive speech. The witness must answer the questions without consulting his colleagues. So, may pinagbabawal din yung pagtatanong or paghihingi ng tulong sa kanyang mga kakampi or sa audience. So, in the questioning period, the questioner may ask any fair, clear question that has direct bearing on the debate. The questioner may use the period to build up any part of his own case, to tear down any part of his opposition's case or a certain facts such as the opposition's position on a certain issue that can be used later in the debate. Okay. The questioner must confine himself to questions and not make statements, comment, or ask rhetorical questions. So, before tayo mag-move sa next slide, mag-admit muna tayo ulit. Okay? So, unti-unting dumarami mga pumapasok. Yan. So, good morning once again sa mga bagong pasok. So, next slide. He who has heard must prove. In order to establish an assertion, the team must support it with enough evidence and logic to convince an intelligent but previously uninformed person. Okay? Admit muna tayo. And that is more reasonable to believe the assertion than to disbelieve it. Facts must be accurate. So, bawal ang fake news dito, mga kapatid. Visual materials are permissible. And once introduced, they become available for the opponent to use if desired. So, admit tayo ulit. So good morning sa bagong pasok. No new constructive arguments may be introduced in the rebuttal period. The affirmative must, if possible, reply to the major negative arguments before their last rebuttal. So going once again, kung sa House Rule number 4, pagka may present na side yung ating debater, uh, may present siyang isang proposition, siya dapat yung may task na mag-prove nun. So, pag may present siya, bawal niyang i-invoke yung other party or yung kanyang kalaban na dapat i-prove na mali siya. So, dapat kung sino yung nag-prove, yung nag-assert, dapat siya yung mag-prove ng kanyang statement. Sa ating fifth na house rule, kapag kayo ay tinatanong, debater, or nire-rebut yung statement nyo, bawal kayong, hindi permissible na mag-introduce kayo ng another issue or ng another topic. Bago kayo makapag-introduce ng another topic, dapat ay may rebut nyo muna or maging responsive kayo sa but as a question na itatanong sa inyo ng sa inyong kalaban. So, yun. So, number 6, gaya na nabanggit natin, new arguments only may be raised once the rebuttal was satisfied. Number 7, it is strictly prohibited to attack and disrespect the person of the opponent instead of the issue at hand. Unruly behavior shall risk being kicked out at the discretion of the moderator. So, ang sino man na makita natin na nagdi-disrespect or pinapahiya or ina-ad hominem ang kanyang kalaban at my own discretion ay mariris itong debater na to na ma-kick out sa ating group para ma-maintain natin yung proper decorum. At ang pinakahuli, no audience are allowed to interrupt the debate proper except during the forum session. So I will repeat. So pwede kayong magbigay ng inyong reaction sa comment section pero mahigpit na pinagbabawal na mag-intervene kayo or sumingit kayo sa nagdi-debate or nagsasalita. So, pagbibigyan namin kayo na makapagsalita, audience, sa forum session. So, now, presentation of the issue. Ano nga ba yung ating pagdedebatehan or pag-uusapan itong araw na ito? Of course, ang ating issue at hand is whether or not the martial law declaration of Marcos Sr. is justified. Tama nga lang ba na nag-declare si Marcos ng martial law? Oo, o bakit? So, dumako tayo ngayon sa team affirmative. So, calling sa ating, okay, so admit muna natin yung mga bagong pasok. Okay, so once again, good morning sa ating mga bagong pasok. So, team affirmative, are you ready to present yourself? Calling sa ating first speaker who will introduce himself, Mr. Mike Raven. Mike Raven, you now have the floor to present yourself, to introduce yourself. Sir Mike. Okay, so let's move on muna for the other speaker, Mr. Lester Michael. Can you please introduce yourself sa ating audience? Can I ask if naririnig po ba ako?
We can hear you lang po.
Okay, sige.
All right, so again, sorry for that whatever technical problem that is. Okay, good. So at least I'm audible. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alister Michael Ray Baladhay, but you could call me Lexter. And I studied in the University of Santo Tomas, and I'm actually a former debater for the Tomasian Debate Varsity since senior high school. So I know somehow the mechanics when it comes to debate, but since that's already before the pandemic, so it's my debate is kind of dull or something. So that's just what I really don't expect a lot from this debate, but at least I have some fun with it. So yeah, that is all. And whatever happens in this debate, the only thing that I am hoping for is that hopefully that this is to join or to have the middle ground in this debate. And I wasn't really expecting that much. Wait.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Lexter. So, Mr. Ken Andre, sa ating another member para sa ating Team Affirmative or Team Pro Martial Law. So, Mr. Ken Andre, please introduce yourself sa ating mga tagapakinig.
Okay, good morning. My name is Andre Gerobiese, and I am the double advocate for the pro martial law camp. And the position that I hold in formulating a pro martial law stance doesn't necessarily come from Marcos directly, because we're drawing too much a great man history when we only talk about Marcos in terms of when we discuss martial law. And so I come with a systematic understanding of why we should support the new society as a whole. The new society system wasn't found by Marcos, it was found in Indonesia. And Indonesia's lasted far longer than Marcos's. It was
Okay,
more stable, it was more...
to interrupt, Brother Ken,
Oh, sorry, dili pa din arguments.
you may present your proposition mamaya. But for now,
Sorry.
makilala tayo or makilala ka ng ating audience. So, pakilala muna natin yung sarili natin. And,
Thank you.
mm, okay, sige. So, I understand na you're already excited to present your case. So, I will hold standby ka muna dyan. So, I would like to call on Mr. Mike Raven to please introduce himself sa ating mga mahal na tagapakinig.
Yes, good morning. Sorry kanina. Off pa
Okay,
lang.
okay, brother. Ayan.
So, Michael Angelo Abarico. I was born in Davao City in 1973. And I'm graduated from Holy Cross of Davao College with a degree in history. So basically what you will hear from me will mostly be based on my experience as I grew up during the martial law period. I am with the affirmative stance, and I will try to prove that the declaration of Marcos was justified, the declaration of martial law. So thank you and good day.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother and Sir Michael Abarico. So, narinig natin at nakilala natin ang ating mga pro or team pro. So, punta tayo ngayon sa team anti or team negative. So, I would like to call on, so admit muna tayo. So, good morning sa ating bagong pasok. So, I would like to call on sa first member ng ating team anti, si Brother John Polon. So, calling Brother John Polon, please introduce yourself.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is John Leonard Cabugos Polon. I am from the University of Santo Tomas. I am currently taking a BS Chemistry and a junior member of the Tomation Debaters Council. So medyo sanay na rin ako sa different debating formats such as those of the parliamentary or the moot court system. So we stand here on why we oppose martial law. It's because of the ill effects that happen during and after of the declaration of martial law itself.
Thank you very much, Brother John Polon. So, I would like to call on sa ating pangalawang member ng Team Anti, si Brother Yuriel Astillero. So, Brother Yuriel. Yan.
Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yuriel Astillero. I am currently a Bachelor of Science in Accountancy student from De La Salle University, Dasmariñas, and I am part of the team negative on martial law. because I believe that in all instances, the Constitution is designed to limit power and is designed to protect individual liberty against the abuse of government. And as Ronald Reagan would say, the government is not the solution to the problem. The government is the problem. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Okay, thank you very much sa inyong introduction, Brother Uriel. So sa last member ng ating Team Antay, I would like to call on John Stephen Cuasay. So please introduce yourself, Mr. Cuasay. Okay, so it seems nawala pa si Mr. Cuasay. So admit muna tayo ng ating mga bagong pasok. So hi and hello and good morning sa ating mga bagong pasok. So now let's proceed. So dear audience, ngayon nakilala natin ng isa't isa yung ating mga debaters from Team Affirmative and Team Negative. So ngayon, babalikan natin yung tanong. So whether or not the martial law declaration of Marcos Sr. is justified. So wag na nating patagalin. Ayan, presentation of position ng Team Affirmative. So now we begin our debate proper. Ayan, so I will stop my presentation for the moment. I would like to call on Mr. Mike Raven to please introduce or give your opening statement, Brother Mike.
Yes, good morning. I will start by giving up a quote and a fact. So, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States was enacted in 1865 by martial law. The 14th Amendment was enacted in 1860 by martial law. Sorry, my call. The 15th Amendment was enacted in 1870 by martial law. Military occupation of the southern states did not end until 1877, 12 years after the end of the Civil War. From Eustace Mullins, American writer, white supremacist, and the most harassed journalist in American history. And from Snopes.com by Noor Ibrahim. The U.S. has imposed martial law at least 68 times in its history. So, what I'm saying here is that the so-called land of the free and home of the brave suffered 68 times in their history under martial law in various circumstances. So, I would like to say that Ferdinand Edralin Marcos did not invent martial law, did not define martial law, and definitely did not own martial law. So that is my opening statement, and I will definitely fight for our affirmative side. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that brief but powerful introduction, Brother Mike Abarico. So for the next opening statement by the Pro or Team Pro, I would like to call on Brother Ken. Please, please introduce your position.
So I'd like to introduce the argument that we need to look at martial law not exactly in terms of like just Marcos introducing it during a time of crisis, but a premeditated revolution, in that he wanted to create the new society system within the Philippines. The new society system in itself was already in development long before it was actually like formulated as a formal ideology under Indonesia's Suharto. And the idea here is that in the new society system, it wasn't exactly what you call crony capitalism, as it was a form of corporatism, wherein a single person, that was Marcos, had in himself the Philippines as a corporation being run by his subsidiaries and all of these other people, with a parliamentary government as a consultative body that will help him in regard of resource extraction or resource dependence. In such way, he has managed to invest and be financially responsible enough to create for himself 2 million pesos worth of value. In this way, I don't believe that most of the 2 million that he earned was through ill-gotten wealth. Rather, what he has done was create a system which optimized the wealth creation of the nation. The only problem with this was human error. And I believe that it was mostly the opulence of his wife and his family that led to its downfall. But had Marcos done it on his own goodwill, we would have been under a true golden age with the level of acumen that Marcos had. And I'm thinking of this in a systematic angle. Outside Marcos, the new society system would have functioned better. And I believe that martial law was instrumental in bringing it about.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Ken Andre Gerobiese. So, pakinggan natin yung pinaka-last but not the least member of the Team Pro. So, I would like to call on Mr. Lester Michael. Okay, check natin kung nandito si Lester Michael or bigla siyang nawala. Okay, so unfortunately, baka nagkaroon ng technical problem yung ating pangatlong debater for the pro side. So, ngayon at napakinggan na natin at least ang panig ng mga pro. So, we will give up the floor to to mga antis. So, I would like to call on Mr. John Polon from the anti side. Can you please present now your proposition?
Is this the question and answering phase now, or I'll give my opening speech?
You give your speech why martial law is not justified.
Okay, let's start. Let's begin this. We all know that martial law was declared as a result of the growing conflicts in the Philippines. Communists and Islamic separatists ravaged the Philippines a few years before the declaration of martial law. And this was not the first time. Martial law was also declared during the Spanish era, but we will focus more on the time of Ferdinand Marcos. It was in September 1972 when the then Minister of Defense Juan Ponce Enrile was ambushed in Mandaluyong, which became the pivotal point in declaring martial law. Let us define first what martial law is. Martial law involves the temporary substitution of military authority for civilian rule and is usually invoked in times of war, rebellion, or natural disaster. When martial law is in effect, the military commander of an area, or kahit civilian man, or a civilian authority, such as the president, or country, has unlimited authority to make and enforce laws. So in times of martial law, military authority would be enforced as substitution for civilian rule, like the Marcos and Fabian Ver and Enrile, as during the Fourth Republic of Marcos's time. So in this case, in times of peril or disorder, the military would step in as the governing body of a state. Let us discuss the historical context of why former President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. As mentioned, martial law was declared as a result of the growing violence that is ravaging the Philippines. Communists wanted to take over the state, and separatists wanted to secede from the Philippines. Martial law was the only way to regain control and stability against the violence that plagued the state during the Marcos I administration. But let us ask ourselves, did martial law fulfill its role in regaining the control and stability of the state? If it did work, then the communists should have been weakened and thus ending the communist insurgency much earlier than what it is now. Islamic separatism should have ended much sooner than it is today. Now, during and after martial law, 1970s to 80s, communist insurgencies reached in peak, and thus it is the failure of martial law, combining the economic downturn, human rights abuses, and corruption in the Philippines during the Marcos regime and insurgencies, and the insurgencies today. I must say that martial law did indeed fail to fulfill its roles. Ask other sources, Britannica, Filipino historians, and many more, that martial law did indeed failed in in the Philippines during the time of Ferdinand Marcos. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Polon, for that very comprehensive proposition. So I would like to call on Mr. Yuriel. You may now present your case.
Okay, good morning to all of you. Now, since my colleague has explained a lot about why martial law is not justified, I would provide with some historical and legal and academic background surrounding martial law. First things first is the U.S. Supreme Court case called Ex parte Milligan, which was decided on 1866. And the summary of the case states that that the government has the power to try civilians with military tribunals during the period of martial law. And this was done during President Abraham Lincoln's time. Now, what the decision of this case came out is that it is declared as unconstitutional that the government would declare martial law in areas where local courts were still in session, and that and then if I could relate this to our situation in during the time of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. as president, he wouldn't know exactly what is the scope or what is the background of the function environment in which the local courts were still in session way back then. He didn't know that, and that is clearly unjustified for him to declare martial law. And then I would read the other parts of the Ex parte Milligan. So Chief Justice Salmon Chase identified three kinds of military jurisdiction, and one of them is martial law proper. It says martial law proper to be exercised in time of invasion or insurrection within the limits of the United States or during rebellion within the limits of the states, maintaining adhesion to the national government when the public danger requires its exercise, called into action by the Congress, or temporarily when the action of Congress cannot be invited, in the case of justifying or excusing peril by the President in times of insurrection or invasion or of civil or foreign war within districts or localities whose ordinary law no longer adequately secures public safety and public rights. So what this is saying is that if the action of the Congress is not is not invited or cannot be invited due to the swift happening of such domestic violence or domestic situation, then the president would declare martial law. But that would be insufficient only if there is a sufficient background that the invasion or the insurrection, the rebellion as provided would suffice in such justification. Now, I would like to proceed to telling you about another background on martial law, and that is that and this comes from Wilbur in his commentary to the Constitution in 1929. He says martial law in its strict sense, or that law which has application when the military arm does not supersede civil authority but is called upon to aid it in the execution of its civil functions. So what this is saying is that when martial law is declared, it does not mean that civil rights are suspended. It does not mean that extension of arbitrary authority is recognized, and it does not also mean that new powers are given to executive. So when President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. had declared martial law, that doesn't mean that he got new powers as the commander in chief or as the executive. The Constitution puts certain limits on executive power and the power of the sword that it has vested in the president. And as I said earlier, the, the Constitution is a document that is designed to limit power, designed to protect individual liberty. Now we wouldn't say that martial law is justified just because there just because Ferdinand Marcos wants the new society to be implemented, or just because there just because the reconstruction amendments to the United States Constitution were amended were introduced in times of martial law. What I'm saying here is that when martial law declares, it means that the districts are not in a period of tranquility. And when it ceases, or when martial law is no longer in effect, then the districts are in a period of tranquility. And yeah, and also I would like to add up before I conclude my case, this law passed by the United States Congress called 𝒆𝒂𝒎 𝑑𝑹𝑶 Act. This was passed in 1878 during the time of President Rutherford B. Hayes. It says that it prohibits United States military involvement in domestic law enforcement without congressional approval. And if I could relate this to the area in which martial law was declared in the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. thus declared martial law without approval of the Congress. So what I'm trying to say here is that the Congress does not give President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. the power to declare martial law, or the Philippine Congress does not pass a law that would authorize President Marcos Sr. to declare martial law. And so it needs to be certain that the principle of separation of powers is necessary in order to prevent abuses of power coming from one individual or coming from one group. And now, before I conclude my case, it is really essential to know that without the Constitution, without the need to limit tyranny, and without the need to protect individual liberty, then we will have a tyranny of the majority, and also a tyranny of the society in which the government is the one who controls every aspect of life. It's like fascism, authoritarianism. It's like we're going back to Nazi Germany, or during the time of Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union, or it's like we are living in George Orwell's world of 1984. I rest my case.
Thank you very much for that very comprehensive presentation of your case, brother or Mr. Yuriel Astillero. So for the last member of the team Antay, I would like to call on John Stephen Cuasay. Are you in? Okay, so mukhang di pa siya nakarating. And sa kanina na nagkaroon ng technical problems from the team pro, si Mr. Lester Michael, are you already there? Or okay na ba yung iyong wala pa rin? Okay, so once again, before we proceed, magpapakilala ulit yung ating
Hello?
mga yung
I'm
okay.
here. Sorry.
Okay, so yan, pakinggan natin yung naputol kanina. Brother Lester Michael from the Team Pro. You may now present your case.
Okay. So, Mr. Speaker or Sir JM, allow me to present to you the side for the motion. On our government side, or the affirmative side, we believe that the House believes that the martial law is justified here in the country. So, but before that, let's first start with the framing of this debate. First is that the theme of this debate should focus entirely on where the social conservatives stand regarding this decades-old issue, based on the principles we uphold. Number two, the setting of this debate happened prior to its declaration, meaning before the September of the 21st, 1972. With that, we should assume that martial law hasn't been implemented and is still up for review, debates, and revision until we meet its final decision as to whether or not we should implement it or not. Third, where reasons are based in real-life documented events before and not during or after its implementation or the proclamation of 1081 or martial law. Otherwise, The debate calls it seemingly as irrelevant given it's necessary to prove one's argument or point. So now let's begin. Now let's proceed to the underlying principle. Wait, sir. Before we start, is there a time limit for this? I guess not.
No naman.
Okay, very good. So this will really take time. So I'll just dissect it in a summaries na lang. Okay. So the underlying principle here is the so now let's start with the underlying principle. So take note, guys, we need to remember that the framing of the debate, as I've said earlier, it will become important later on into the to the rebuttals or what. So there. I already framed up that point. So now let's proceed to the underlying principle. Where does social conservatives stand on this issue on regards to the proclamation 1081, given the current circumstances of that time prior that leads to it? So meaning, ang ibig lang sabihin nun ay sa mga hindi masyado na, so I'll just try to become Taglish para maintindihan lahat ng mga nandito. Ang ibig lang sabihin nito ay ano pa ba ang stand dito bilang mga social conservatibo sa proclamation number 1 that before to nangyari yung martial law. So now proceed na ako dito. The relevant main principles for us social conservatives that we believe that in this debate are as follows. And number 2, it's all about the rise of the communist insurgency. And 2 is all about there is no such thing as absolute freedom of speech and expression in relation to human rights. All right, so now let's begin. Under the concept of the absolute freedom of speech and expression relating to human rights. Too much freedom can allow you to infringe on the freedom of another person. Too much freedom, sorry. This often takes the form of endangering the person's safety, which is the violation of this right to be safe and protected. Therefore, I argue that the principal reason we have limits in our rights is for us to protect from others and to protect others from us. If everyone had unlimited freedom, there would be no protection. As members of the society, we agree to give up certain freedoms in exchange for safety. So the key word here is we gave up some of the freedom in exchange for safety, which is exactly the essence of martial law. And this is actually the social contract that we will try to live in. As a firm follower of the Philippine Social Conservative Movement, in the name of protecting our ideology, and the government has the best interest in us, and it's in favor of us social conservative regarding for the implementation of martial law. And here's why. Because we social conservatives believes that the condemning violent acts perpetrated by the socialists, communists, specifically the rise of the CPP, NPA, and DF. So the rise of the communists in under different parts of the world during the Cold War prior to the 70s under the Black Book of Communism, Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, or shall I say, the post-pact, the Warsaw Pact, sorry, the Latin America, the Cuba, Africa, and Afghanistan are one of those countries. Specifically, are the current geopolitical times, the Laos, the China, Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam. It is estimated that under the Black Book of Communism, there are millions of people that are killed under this horrific communist regime. And the death toll is estimated to be more than 65 million in China, 3.5 million in the Korean Peninsula, 2.4 million in Cambodia, or which is called the murder of the Khmer Rouge, and they're estimated to be 1.8 million in Vietnam, and it's estimated to be there around 500,000 in Indonesia. And those that are supported by the Joma season or the MPA faction, the communists in the Philippines are inspired by the Mao Zedong, or what you call the Maoist. It is estimated that this is still under his regime, so that's called there's estimated to be around 49 to 78 million deaths under Chairman Mao's rule or the regime. So we don't have 79 to 78 million deaths. That's actually included in that's already added for the Filipino people and the Chinese people. In short, the estimated number of victims, according to the introduction of the people killed by the communist governments, amounts to estimated more or less 94 million. That is actually almost 100 million. That's actually equivalent to the entire Philippine population, almost the entire population of the Philippines. The statistics includes of victims include death through execution, hunger, famine, deportations, and forced labor. So now, we social conservatives believe in bringing strong leadership that condemns any violent and terrorist act of bringing bloody revolution into the state. Its battle for communism, socialism, extreme leftism, and the Philippines are trying to subjugate the country to topple its legitimate democratic government by capturing innocent, unknowing, helpless Filipino people so that they can convert them into servants of the so-called the CPP, NPA, NPF under the yoke of the dictatorship of the proletariat. My fellow social conservatives, we stand firm and are strongly against these leftist ideologies. While they speak of sugar-coated words, they advocate for terrorism and violence. Now, let's proceed to the prelude of the story as to why this is the justification of the martial law. All right, so the geopolitics of the Philippines in the 50s, 60s, and the early 70s. So now let's start with China. China launched the so-called the Cultural Revolution, meaning that it's estimated that all the principles such as the four olds, the old customs, the old cultures, the old habits, and the ideas will be extremely illegal, and all of the paramilitary groups called the Red Guards are possibly going to attack and harass members of the China's elderly and intellectual population. That's according to Mao Zedong after the post-Soviet split. And they're estimated that 1.5 million people are killed during the Cultural Revolution alone, and millions others are suffered from imprisonment, seizure property, general humiliation. But that's exactly the problem in the Chinese. In the North Vietnam. For the case in North Vietnam, this prior to the fall of Saigon, because the fall of Saigon happens in 1975, but doesn't really change the fact that the presence of the communism in the Southeast Asia was already being felt. That already follows by Cambodia, which I'll proceed into that. The Cambodia's communist movement originated by the Communist People Revolutionary Party, which was formed in 1971 under the auspices of the 𝑉𝑇 of Vietnam, meaning that parties largely by French-educated Marxist leaders eventually renamed it as the Communist Party of 𝒃𝒎. By the late 1950s, members were engaged to clandestine activities against the government of Prince Norodom Sihanouk, but for many years, they made little headway against the Sihanouk, from their bases to remote the jungle and mountain areas, and so on and so forth. And that's exactly the reason as to leads to the communist regime. So now, let's focus on the casualties report at the end of its regime. It is estimated that almost 2 million people that died from this regime, and they're still now under the trial under the UN Human Rights Council. So unfortunately, there are only three individuals that are prosecuted, and the rest of those that are involved with this regime is either get away with it or it's either they're found loopholes to this law. So the justice of these people still needs to be served even up to now. Now let's begin to the most interesting part, which is the Philippines. So now before I'll start, so I'll just divide it into three. The rise of the communist insurgency, the 𝑚𝒃𝒎 and the Andrea incident, Victor Corpus, Bernardo Boscaino, and Joma season, and the post-Plaza Miranda incidents, this is actually a lot, but I'll just try to narrow it down because we still have a few time left, so I have to respect that. And the rise of the Muslim separatist movement, which is exactly the thing that history hasn't been taught us for somehow, and behind its implementation for the proclamation 10081. So now let's begin. All right, so the 𝑚𝒃𝒎 and the Andre incident on the 4th of July 1972. The Communist Party of the Philippines, New People's Army, the Democratic Front import guns, rockets, ammunition, and military supplies, and the 𝑚𝒃𝒎 in the MV area. So this is exactly the reason why. And the post-Plaza Miranda incidents, I guess you already know. You already know the thing here, like the the bombings, the following up bombings heads to the martial law, and the Muslim separatist movement. So I don't have to further explain to that. And the definition of history. So I guess that's all I have to. Sorry, but that's all I have to end my presentation. Here in the government side, we are proud to propose.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lector Michael. So, I would like to call yung sa kanina na di pa nakapag-present ang kanyang proposition. Mr. John Stephen Cuasay, nandiyan ka na ba? So, it seems na wala pa siya. So, now, napakinggan natin yung side ng bawat isa. So, let's the battle begin. So, everyone, can you na gusto mag-propose or gusto mag-rebut ng statement ng kabilang panig, you may now raise your hand and wait for to be recognized. Okay, next turn, Michael.
Okay, so there's really a lot of people that falls into this trap of by framing. So I was about to be the first one to be supposed to be we are in the affirmative side to be the first. So like I said in my previous framing of this debate, it should happen before, and what should it be done if you have the opportunity to try and travel back? If martial law is not justified, what are the other alternatives that you can propose? Because I haven't heard that from your side. So I want to hear that from you.
Okay, nagtaas ng kamay si Brother Yuriel Astillero. You may now
Okay.
answer the question.
Okay, so as much as I understand the aggravating effect of communism here in the Philippines before, I would say to you, I would share that during the time when 𝑻𝒆𝒂𝒎 was the defense secretary, he told that he doesn't need martial law to quell communist insurgencies. He needs the military to do the job. He needs only his charisma and his capacity as defense secretary to do the job to quell communist rebellions and insurrections. And that was the time during President Elpidio Quirino. So he doesn't need martial law to do that. And if I could express my anti-martial law views, it wouldn't be necessary that martial law would be declared on the larger extent or on the minimal extent of such threat that is imposed upon by the communist insurgencies, for example, or other terrorism. So the extent of the threat of violence that is depicted by the communist insurgencies or the Muslim terrorism is minimal. It means that it does not focus entirely on the country as a whole, and that and then if I could state this correctly, Islamist terrorism focus only on Mindanao, while communism focus on certain areas that does not on certain areas that does not mean that the need to declare martial law needs to have a larger extent of occupying such necessity in making a decision to declare martial law that would be a necessity to quell communist and terrorist threats. Yeah, that's my rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Astillero, anyone from the pro side who would like to counter the rebuttal of Mr. Astillero? Okay, Ken Andre raised his hand. So Ken Andre, you now have the floor.
So forgive me for my partner's insolence in terms of time, but in the subject that we're talking about, it's always not really understandable when you think about we always talk about like the ways by which the government was attacked by external forces, but we completely forget the threats from within. By the time of Marcos's reign, an article that I read from a political science class, it said that the entire place was riddled already with factional families, and the entire thing was going to fall apart anyway. That the idea was that the Philippines under Marcos was already falling apart at the seams, as individual families were suddenly trying to uh, have their own way in the world and whatever they wanted. And then there's also the middle class students who wouldn't go to get jobs because they were actually starting to go on the protests. They were failing in their classes, and then they were not going to graduate anyway. They didn't see a hope of the future, and all of these other like self interests pulled apart at the Philippines order. And so martial law was definitely in that case a response to instability in itself, rather than just the external forces of rebellion and communism and whatever have you. The entire idea is that under the martial law regime, you had the ability to keep order, the only way to keep order left, and that was through military force. It wasn't a matter of the social contract or anything else, because no one really believed in the Philippines anymore by the time that Marcos took power. By that era, you had military people who were getting ranks because of their connections to higher levels of the higher levels in the thing. That's why RAM happened. The Reform Armed Movement tried to stop that from happening. And in martial law, Marcos was definitely like that stitch that it was like a stitch. It wasn't a patch, it was a stitch that tried to close a gaping hemophilic wound. It was a really, really bad band-aid solution, but nonetheless, it did work. People did manage to rally around, ironically, the bad figure that was Marcos and unite as a nation once again and believe that the Philippines did have a bright hope for the future. Now, I know that this isn't exactly the best idea that Marcos was supposed to do it, but the consequences of history would have been that the Philippines would not have existed the next day had Marcos never taken power at all. We were talking about too much self-interest, too much freedom, too much people saying we want this and we want that everything started to fall apart. No one wanted to be here. Nobody wanted to stay. Nobody wanted the government order. Nobody wanted anything. In fact, the Diliman Commune, if I remember correctly, was ran by anarchists. And Joma Season had to shut it down himself. The Diliman Commune was a testament to the fact that there was a popular moving away from the Philippine order, but there was no organic alternative. There was no organic solution whether people should either stay in the Philippines or not. Martial law provided the backdrop for which people united themselves in under a common flag, a common ideology, and a common dictator or ruler.
Okay, thank you very much. There were already two people who raised their hand to counter the argument of Mr. Ken. I would give the chance to Mr. John Polon. So, John Polon.
Well, as you mentioned, well, thank you for this. As you mentioned a while ago, that the Philippines was unstable even before the proclamation of martial law. Now, to see, as I mentioned in my argument, martial law was declared as a response to the growing unrest. However, with martial law itself, martial law made it much far worse than it has been before. As I mentioned a while ago, during the 1970s to 80s, during the period of martial law, the communist insurgency reached its peak, in which half or 1/5 of the Philippines has been the ground for communists itself. Now, with martial law combining with the downturn, with the instability, we see here that martial law has failed to fulfill its role as a response against the growing threat. As a result, martial law created more instability and created more gave way to the downfall or to the lagging behind of the Philippine state. So so I rest my case here, and thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Mr. Astillero is also raising his hand.
Okay. Just as much as we understand just how how dangerous we would have experienced if martial law has not been declared. But martial law is really an extraordinary power that is vulnerable to abuse. And given that our system is a copycat of the American system, vesting the power of the sword in the hands of the one single individual, which is the president, is risky. It's like we are going back to the history of the time in which we have seen the fair share of autocratic rules, such as in Tsarist Russia, wherein Tsar Nicholas II inadvertently quelled the protest, the peaceful protests during the 1905, the year 1905. And then we would have seen, and then there were moments in our history in which um autocratic rule has been synonymous with communism and fascism as well. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot, man, those figures that I'm saying, they were hardline, die hard autocrats. And and even then, I would say that there were different approaches when it comes to exercising the power of the sword. Um, Men like Abraham Lincoln did it in order to preserve the Union, but in all its advantages, he did so in order to arrest the dissenters, to uh, shut down the press that was sympathetic to the Confederate cause, and he did not give the trial to Confederate sympathizers, and that was mirrored as the abuse of power, abuse the individual rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution, or are mirrored under constitutionalism. And so as much as we don't have the same economic, social, and political path from other countries, but let me say this to you. Um, it is truly regretful to say that that we end up having a system that compels one individual to abuse power, not only through military means but also through economic ones. The Filipino First policy, as as enacted during President Carlo P. Garcia's time, um, has been um, has been disadvantageous at the very beginning. It is not beneficial for us to have a protectionist policy that would aggravate the effects of our countrymen, that would exacerbate the poverty that we have right now, long before martial law was declared. Surely we failed to implement certain free market policies, and surely we failed to become like Singapore or South Korea, or other Asian tigers, in which they implement free market policies, or they have a parliamentary system, all because of their pragmatism. Sa atin kasi hindi naman tayo pragmatiko, eh. It's like we are hell-bent on an ideology that is deemed as extremism, that should not be condoned as a single or a guiding ideology or a guiding principle, that would have become the factor as to why martial law is declared, or as to why martial law is justified. Now we are seeing the countless testimonies of martial law survivors, and I didn't mean that martial law survivors who are communism should be heard, but it should be a matter of time that we have to recognize the limits of the powers of the government. We need to have a limited government so that there will be no abuse of power, and so that the individual would have the capacity under the free enterprise system to make decisions based on their private choices, so that free market would flourish, so that competition will flourish. And this is not what Marcos had done before. And as what Ken said, that in the new society, it was supplemented by the crony capitalism. I disagree with crony capitalism. Crony capitalism is not synonymous with free market capitalism or libertarian capitalism. It only empowers the government with the help of technocrats and other experts to run the economy they see fit. But that doesn't mean that they empowered individuals, private businessmen, local businessmen, investors, industrialists, manufacturers, producers, suppliers, buyers. The government did not empower them to make free decisions for themselves. And yeah, I rest my case.
Okay, so narinig natin yung rebuttal ng dalawang rebuttal sa side ng Team Anti. So merong dalawang debaters from the Team Pro ang nagtaas ng kanilang kamay, starting with Lexter Michael. So Lexter Michael, yan.
All right. So first off, as I said, I don't want to be more technical, so I'll just try to loosen myself right now. All right. So anyways, given the chance that I think we can all agree, we the Filipino people can agree that there has to end of this insurgency throughout the country. And there's one thing, but before I start that, there's really one thing that this debate is already trying to disregard something, which is the geopolitics of the current times in those 1970s and the 80s. During those times, specifically in the 80s and 70s, Ken already mentioned that the rise of the communism is actually more different than it was in the 50s. I mean, if you come to think about it, the Soviet Union and the rest of the countries that follows actually become stronger because due to the weapons and how heavily armed they are. So with that said, the militarism is already so strict when it comes to the communist country. Now, how does democracy, if I were to ask you guys, I mean, how does democracy are trying to fight, freedom and democracy are trying to fight for this? What is this? Like, are you trying to fight it with bare hands or swords or something? That's not the way how we try to fight things up. I mean, for a leader like Marcos Sr., the only thing that I admire him the most is really that we need a strong leader like him. Why? It's because if we try to become soft into something, specifically what happens to Jimmy Carter when he tries to kiss ass on the CCP or that's basically it, like try to kiss on the CCP and everything. And that's exactly the reason as to why the morale of the American people at the time in the 70s becomes lower. And here comes the Ronald Reagan of the 80s. And during that time, it's because of Ronald Reagan trying to become too harsh, to heavily militarize on communism. He actually increased the military spending at that time, just to pot up that ideology. So, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm trying to prove to you is that if you want to fight, if an enemy fights you with guns, you should also fight with guns. And this is exactly what the militarism or the martial law should be do. And since the threat, because we try to forget the threat of the geopolitical at the times and we focus more on the internal, which is exactly what the critics are trying to forget. Or not forget, but they're trying to disregard, I'm sorry. It's the one reason as to why that it's becoming a short-minded to them, that it's only what they feel, but they don't completely understand the entire big pictures of it. So with that said, and so I already asked them about how. I mean, they never they said about the how, the part about the how. If martial law is not, if they don't allow martial, if they disagree of the implementation of martial law, what are the other alternatives? And as far as I answered that question, there's only critics that this is bad, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is good, and all that stuff. So it's really, this debate never focuses about the how actually. So I guess I'll just have to start with that. So now, actually, I do have to agree sometimes that martial law becomes abusive. So, okay, sure. Um, martial law becomes abusive and all that stuff. So, what should it be done? All right. So, noting that the geopolitical of those times is very becomes to the rise of the communism in the 70s, 80s. So, what should it be done instead? If I were Marcos Senior, is that we try to have martial law, but it has to be keep on check. As we said, I have to agree on that limited government, but does it really change the fact that we still have to implement it simply because, like I said in the earlier debate, that we need to fight guns with guns. And with that said, and this is exactly how our country ends up today. So with that said, I guess I have to rest my case, and I've already proven to you as to why martial law is still need to be needed in this debate. I rest my case, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lecturer Michael. As regards to our debaters, please don't mind yung yung ating chat box. Whenever may comments ako, I would mag-speak directly na ako sa inyo. And then yung mga iano ko sa chat box, ito yung mga about sa mga sa ating audience. Okay, so going back, it seems Mr. Mike Riven has something to say.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's be reminded that the debate is about if the declaration of martial law was justified. So right now I'm hearing so far nothing for the alternatives about martial law. The left has no alternative to give. How can we solve the problems during those times, considering the geopolitics at the time? Practically, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s are very troublesome times on Earth. So, right now, wala pa ring alternative to martial law. So, what is martial law? Martial law is basically a self-defense weapon of the state, to protect itself from threats, foreign or domestic. So, and I would just like to react regarding the declaration of Abraham Lincoln of martial law. It was not martial law that was being questioned. So it was the legality or the constitutionality of the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. So the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court issued a ruling that Abraham Lincoln did not have the authority to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. The declaration of martial law by Abraham Lincoln was approved also by the U.S. Congress at the time. And with regards to Ramon Magsaysay, declaring that he does not need martial law to defeat the 𝒃𝒎 𝑷𝑹𝑒𝐻. Well, maybe it is because the U.S. were directly involved in our counterinsurgency at the time. You know, who is the military advisor of Ramon Magsaysay? Who is the speechwriter of Ramon Magsaysay? It was a colonel, American military colonel. So, and the CIA funneled $1 million directly to Ramon Magsaysay to help fight the 𝒃𝒎 𝑷𝑹𝑒𝐻. You know, our nation, our country is directly linked to the intestines of the Americans. So especially during after the war. Do you know where is the CIA headquarters here in Southeast Asia? It is in Manila. So they've been creating chaos ever since it was created in the late 1940s. So CIA operated here in our country unabatedly. No? Unabated yan in fighting communism. No? America has been inflicted by Red Scare since 1920s pa. 1920s pa. may Red Scare na sa US. So they fear the communist takeover of America because of the rising unions in the USA during the 1920s. So it came to a head in the 40s and 50s at the height of the Cold War. So basically, the Philippines was part of the proxy war between ideologies, no? Between the communist bloc and the American, let's say, capitalist bloc. Okay, so where did we stand? Of course, we are with the Americans. We are with the Americans at that time. Now, the left has been always saying Marcos was a tuta or puppet of the US. The question is, did Marcos remain a tuta of the US? I don't think so. Because the geopolitics in the 1970s changed all that. No? It was reported by the CIA that the Mindanao insurgents, Muslim insurgents, had 15,000 to 17,000 armed soldiers by 1973. And during the 65 to 67 years, the Hukbalahap has shown an increase in presence and growth. So there was already a rising threat prior to the declaration of martial law. And the CIA has a very strong influence on our military and economic decisions at the time. So meron tayong in-approve na parang treaty, economic treaty with the US. I just forgot about that. You can research on that. So the US has a very large influence on our politics and economy. 1965, almost the start of the Vietnam War, early 1970s, the Vietnam War was winding down. So there was a fear of the domino effect, as mentioned by Dexter earlier. So this domino effect is very important in the formulation of our policy, both foreign and foreign. So Marcos saw that the US power is declining and eventually defeated in 1975. So he changed his policy, no? May tawag na policy na openness na. Ideology is no longer a category to determine who our friends are. So our country, through Marcos, initiated diplomatic ties with the communists. With the communist China, the Soviet bloc. Why? Because he sees first our national interest, not the interest of the Americans. Another factor that the left is saying that the martial law did not create what was expected. There are so many factors that were not controlled by Marcos, especially the geopolitics, the Arab-Israeli war. Remember that the Arab-Israeli war spawned an oil crisis. The OPEC sanctioned the US in 1973 for siding with the Israelis. And you know what? We were also given an embargo by the OPEC for the reason that we are allied with the US, and most of our oil companies are owned by Americans during those times. Even leftist media admitted that our economy was booming in the 1970s to late 70s because our agriculture was booming. We have so many sugar and coconut to sell in the world. So our gross national product boomed. No? So Marcos has to find a way so that our country will not break up. No, communist insurgency in Luzon, Visayas, Muslim secessionists in the south, political activists and political hackers. No, so basically Filipinos are the number one enemy of the state. What is the best alternative at that time? No, what is the best alternative that the left can give? If you are the leader sitting there, you will have the most for the best thing you will have to combat these threats. So martial law is there in the Constitution even right now. If martial law is not legal, then the left should question why is martial law in the Constitution, diba? So that is the point there. And it was only not Marcos who declared martial law. Virtually many countries, dozens of countries declared martial law. Diba? Martial law can be used, can be declared in natural disasters, after coup d'etat. Diba? Violations of human rights are given. No, are given. Because in any situation, there will always be with opposing minds that also will lead to sometimes violence, di ba? Whether ideology, religion, or something else. No, I was born in 1973. So basically, I see, I hear nothing about martial law during 1970s. I did not hear my parents mention about it. When my parents talk to others, I did not hear about martial law. The only one I witnessed was a demonstration by students in 𝑗𝑚𝒆𝒂𝒎 Bonifacio Street. I think they were from the University of Mindanao, and they were riot police. That was it. The only time that trouble was seen by me was during the early 80s. When the NPA has already expanded into the city, Davao City, they made Davao City as a laboratory for their Sparrow unit. So violence erupted. Dozens of policemen are killed every day. So manning traffic post, patay. Dadaan lang, ambush, patay. Sa city yan na, sa city. Kaya tinawag yung isang part sa Davao City, Nicaragdao. Because there was too much violence. And yung maa, bugak maa, meaning crackhead, shothead. Diba? So, then I began to see teachers politicized, showing like this, laban sign, na. So it was in the early 80s that martial law was really felt by me. So,
Okay, sure.
Good.
I'm sorry for the
Okay.
interruption. And since it's already 11:30, and also sorry for the debaters, we will reserve the remaining 30 minutes before 12 o'clock for our audience to give their questions. So, okay, so I'm sorry debaters, since limited lang yung time natin. So the floor is now open for our dear audience to throw their question to either side. So you may just raise your hand. Meron po bang gustong magtanong sa part ng audience? Okay. Okay, from Steven Credo, or Credo, sorry.
Hi po, good
Mr.
morning.
Okay, good morning, sir.
Hello po. Just one question for each side. No, let's start with the affirmative. I guess the main question then is for the for the affirmative. I'm going to play devil's advocate. No, you did mention that you throughout the debate, I've heard rebuttals of what is the alternative, in terms of what would have been a better deal than martial law. So the question then for you would be, if in fact martial law was the only way to fix the said problem, um, was there another? Can was I will have to ask the question, the same question to you. Was there in fact it was martial law in fact the only way to have solved the issues that were present at the time? That's my only question. And on top of that, if martial law was in fact the only way to solve it, secondly, was the amount of time that was placed for martial law to be in effect justified? Thank you very much.
I don't think so. The idea of martial law was that the situation had become so volatile by the late stages of or the early stages actually of Marcos's second term, that that martial law had to be implemented. But we already know that there was a better solution for everything else, and that was the 72 Constitutional Convention, a new form of non-American, non-Western style capitalist forms of government was going to emerge through that. But instead, what happened was that the left jumped the gun. And what instead happened was massive protests in the streets, chaos erupting. Had none of these happened, and had the Constitutional Committee just went with it, Marcos would already have not been in power by that point, and the Constitutional Committee would have been acclimating to the various demands of these groups. Let us remind people that during the 50s and the 60s, the left were definitely present and were definitely active within the social sphere of the politics at the time. The left was definitely heard, unlike today, wherein the left is often the boogeyman in terms of like what we're supposed to say and like this. People actively sought out the Communist Party of 1930, for what they're supposed to do. And the Communist Party of 1930 did give numbers, active numbers in terms of like who they were going to vote. So it was definitely in a sense, had 𝑗𝑜 not split, had the left not jumped the gun, we would have seen a better way to have created a better or new society independent of Marcos, independent of everything else. However, it would not have exactly been the same tinge as martial law. It was definitely going to restabilize the country had they not, just jumped the gun and not bombed Plaza Miranda, not gone through the first quarter storm. Had they not jumped the gun, everything would have been fine.
Can I answer the question? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Actually, martial law is not the only option that we could utilize in order to solve a domestic issue. I'm thinking that that during the time of the Russian Civil War, in which Bolsheviks were fighting the White Russians or the White Army. What the Russian provisional government did, or what the White Russians did, was that they call up foreign countries, including the United States, to come up and join join the battle against the Bolshevik communism. And so martial law is not the only solution for that. But in the end, I would say that that calling up foreign countries for assistance, for military assistance, it would be better. Like we would say that it should not only be the United States that we should rely on 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 countering the threat of communism and Islamic insurgencies. We could at least call other countries, or call our neighbors, such as Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and even then India, Pakistan, and a few of European countries such as France, United Kingdom, Italy, and other countries that we have diplomatic relations at that time. And so I'm sorry if I'm a bit too passionate to to make rebuttals against the affirmative side, but what I'm trying to say is the alternative to martial law, which is calling up foreign countries for military assistance, so that we would quell domestic threats such as the communist rebellions and even then the Islamic insurgency threat. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just have one
Oh,
last
go ahead.
question, sorry po. I had a different question supposedly for the anti-group. But yes, this is my last question, and it'll be just very quick lang.
Okay. Sure.
My last question is was initially what was going to be about what was something similar to the question for the pro, which was what's your alternative? But after hearing that alternative, I would have to beg to differ in the sense that attempting to ask for assistance, military assistance from the neighboring countries outside of the US would like at the time, at least during the geopolitical time of Southeast Asia, would be something similar to asking uh, uh, it would be like a poor man asking another poor man if they had change, right? So in that sense, it would be more it would have made more sense if main reason why we can see the Philippines relying heavily on the United States was not only because of the amount of money that they had, but the actual strength as a nation, and asking the Philippines of that time to rely on anyone else outside of the United States, and even if they look to the United Nations, is in itself a very difficult thing to do, because again, the latest and biggest ally of the Philippines at the time was the United States, and we saw the kind of relationship that they had with Reagan and as well as Marcos Sr. Now, my question then is, in terms of as a nation of the 60s, what do you think would have happened if martial law would not have been implemented? Do you think we could have survived um, the 60s and 70s without martial law? Please, that would be a very important thing to look at, considering the personalities that we had at the time. Thank you.
Thank you for that very good question, Mr. Steven, as always. So, Mr. John Polon is raising his hand.
So yeah, before we engage with the enemy, such as communism, we must know ano ba yung communism? Ano ba pinaglalaban nito? This is what I noticed in the debate. We haven't touched what communism is. So now, let us first define ano ba yung communism. First of all, communism, which is a political and economic system, which means they wanted to abolish the social classes. They wanted the proletariat revolution. Now, let's say communism is the antithesis. Then what is the antithesis? Then what is the thesis? The counteract, like the Le Chatelier's principle of chemistry. How do we counter communism? First, we had the experience back in the Hukbalahap of the 50s, and we could use that experience on battling the same battling communism, the insurgency. We can minimize the risk by conducting anti-guerrilla warfare and anti-guerrilla warfare tactics against those rebels who have plagued the Philippines. Now, to the economic situation, the only way to counteract what communism wants to achieve is to provide a much better economic solution, a free market for investing during the 1960s, and to attract foreign investors, and also to battle within the ranks as well. This is what happens during Magsaysay's time as defense secretary. We need to purge or battle corruption within the government in order to not give the communists the bullets against us. And lastly, when it comes to martial law, we could have easily contained the rising communists without declaring martial law, if we know what communism is and how they want to fight in war. Since these communists, as Joma Season would principle, he wants to fight it in a guerrilla type of warfare, not a conventional warfare. So since we have the experience back in the 50s, we could have engaged them in a guerrilla war, anti-guerrilla operation, just like what 𝒉𝒂𝒎 did, since 𝒉𝒂𝒎 has an experience in as a guerrilla fighter. He knows how to fight it. Rather than the search and destroy tactics, we could have used the clear and hold tactics. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So again, Mr. Steven is asking. So with what could have happened if hindi na declare yung martial law? So do you want to ask another more, Brother Steven, or are you already
I'm okay lang po. There are other people who have questions, so let's have them ask po. Thank you.
okay? Thank you, Brother Steven. Steven. Okay. So we have another question coming from Charles.
Hello, good morning. Narinig niyo po. I have question for pro-martial law.
Hello. Can you please
Hello.
Charles?
Hello.
Okay, nagkaroon ng meeting, ng problem sana niya. So, Mr. GJ Noel Mia,
Hello. Ay,
okay?
narinig niyo na po ako.
Yes, bro.
Yes.
Question lang po sa pro-martial law po and anti-martial law. And for pro-martial law, do you think that Marcos Sr. really wanted to declare martial law to solve insurgency problem in the Philippines? I meant, do you really think that martial law was declared by Marcos Sr. because he wanted to solve insurgency problem in the Philippines? If so, why did he stay in power for 21 years?
Hell no. As in, let's talk about the historical evidence for a bit. We're in favor of martial law, but we do not avoid the facts. We know that martial law was pre-planned. We know about Operation Sagittarius. We know about everything. All of this is plain as day. We have records of it everywhere. We should not dispute the facts of the case. Okay? We should not dispute the facts of the case. We know that the declaration of martial law was a selfish endeavor. But at the same time, it had the beneficial side effect of uniting the nation. Okay? The end of the insurgency was a common theme already by the time of Marcos. Okay? American foreign policy is based upon any country's opposition to communism. Any one of the countries. If they oppose communism, America will support it. We were a dependent state of the Americans, and so every single policy needed to be within the line of it needed to be opposed to communism. All of it, any policy that we made. So when we have, for example, Marcos, who said that we're making martial law against communism, the Americans were going to be like, okay, turn a blind eye and like that. But if you have like this and kind of thing using like Marxist terminology and language, the CIA is going to knock on your house at 3 a.m. and you're never going to be found by your children again. The entire idea here is that when it came to Marcos, okay, that it's a common line to say that he was there to fight insurgency when we completely forget that the Philippines was the first country to establish foreign relations with Maoist China when it first opened. Not Nixon, us. We were the first ones. Even before Seattle was broken down, we were already in talks with China. We were heavily trading with China at the time. Even today, we are one of the largest importers from North Korea. This was all because of Marcos. In the interviews of 𝑉𝐵𝑚 and 𝐼ME, they admitted that most of the machinery, the economic machinery of Marcos, was used to launder the money used in order to purchase goods from China and to conduct trade with the socialist bloc. All of this is happening within the backdrop of martial law. So why do we keep on fooling ourselves to think that martial law was there to fight communist insurgency? It was never about communism. Martial law was never about communism. It was always about Marcos's self-interest. This is the reason why this is not the relevant point when we discuss why martial law is good or not. The relevant point is whether the effect on the stability of the country it had was positive or negative. And we could see that it was definitely a positive. It had the country existing for 20 more years when it was on the brink of collapse. That is the effect of martial law. Now, when we say that all of this, was it justified to bring into martial law? Elpidio Quirino did the exact same thing without the need of martial law. He did the exact same thing and he managed to obliterate the Hawk Rebellion. Let's not kid ourselves that martial law was justified because of insurgency. That wasn't it. Rather, it was a state of lawlessness and instability which justified martial law. No one could control anyone anymore. The government had no power. That's the only reason why martial law happened.
Okay. So with due respect, I thought you, Mr. Ken, was from the pro debate team.
Yeah, so this is a pro argument. This is a pro argument. The idea is that we should justify martial law in terms of its effect on lawlessness, in which it brought order again, not in the effect of it was there to eliminate insurgency, which it never did. It had no interest in doing so. The continuation of the communist insurgency in the Philippines is what kept Chinese and Filipino ties during the time of its diplomatic issue. Why would they need to remove them? Why? Only during the time of Cory did they kick out 𝑍𝐵𝐻. Only then. But during the time of Marcos, he was here. Everyone was here.
Okay, so
Sir, permission to speak from the pro side. I would just like to add
Sure,
something
sure.
as to what Ken said. All right, so kasi kanina pa ako nag-raise your hand so baka tumahimik ka. So I'll just try to be loud about it. All right, so anyways, here's the reality, guys, that we need to understand. Actually, Ken is correct. That's exactly what I was thinking throughout my mind, and that's exactly how the team turns out. It's already about the violence and the lawlessness. That's the reason why we implemented martial law. Okay, so I have to clarify that, Mr. Speaker, that this is literally not backstabbing, but rather this is really about the violence that it has created that caused the death or the murder that we try to avoid. And secondly is that you cannot. My argument earlier was that if they use guns, we use guns. It's only applicable physically, but never about ideologically. What do I mean by that? You cannot kill or fight communism with guns. You cannot fight or kill an ideology or capitalism or any sort of ideology with guns or swords or whatever any physical force means. Because the reality is that we try to eliminate ideology. It's either through propaganda or education. Because, I mean, let's accept the fact that it's already there. Karl Marx invented it, and the rest is history. Now, how are we going to avoid it? It is really through education or propaganda. And that's exactly the reason why Marcos Sr., I think the media, the suppression of the media was shut down is because he understands that the only way to fight communism is in the minds. What do I mean by that? Since it's in the process of the minds, it's within us. Anyone can become communist. We will never know, right? Or anyone can become capitalist, rightist, or left-winger for some sort of that matter. because it's in our heart, it's in our mind. So the only way to fight that is you need to educate people that this is how it works, this is all that, and to try to, well, I don't know the right term, but this term is very negative, but it's through brainwashing. This is exactly both sides are using, and we have to admit that as well. Both the communists and the extremists, the right wing extremists, that leads to this violence, because it all started really in the mind, and that's exactly the reason why we need to shut down the necessary books that needs to be avoided. This is exactly, it's like saying that we need to avoid pornography or something to the minors, or for us conservatives that we need to remove, that we have to stop children from educating us, such as the drag queens and the LGBT stuff that needs to be taught, because they know the possible that whatever is in the mind will possibly come out through actions, and that action is the thing that we're just preventing. But that's just it. And if we follow that principle that it's all in the mind, so that's exactly the reason why Marcos tried to stop us from books, read us from the books, because that is really the root cause of the problem, guys. If you come to think about it, it's really never about the violence. That's just the effects about the about what is in the mind, or about the people. So the only way, anyway. So I have to. I'm sorry, but I have to. Just need to add what Sir Ken is pointing out, because that's just basically the tip of the iceberg, but I'll try to make it deeper so that our sides will become stronger than it was. So I think I've already done, and I rest my case for that matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So now we proceed. Yung kaninang naputol na question si Mr. Charles.
Hello po. Last question for anti-martial law. We all know that in 1987 Constitution, declaring martial law was different than during Marcos era. So for anti-martial law, do you support how martial law could be declared in the 1987 Constitution? If not, what do you think is the alternative solution that the Philippines could use to fight insurgency, terrorism, and other lawless violence in the Philippines?
Okay, thank you very much, Charles. So anyone from the anti side?
Yuri.
Yes. Okay. To answer Charles' question, I will. Yes.
Proceed, proceed.
Okay. To answer Charles' question, I would say that I am first off, I am supportive of the current form of declared martial law that we have in the 1987 Constitution. But what would be what the best solution we can come up is that we can at least amend some portions of the power of the sword clause that is found in Article 7 of the 1987 Constitution, in which uh, we would require the president to consult with his military advisors or with his war experts first before declaring martial law, because it is quite extraordinary to have this awesome power to be vested in a single individual that would practically abuse it. Now, now we're no longer in an era in which we would only rely on theories, especially when it comes to the constitutionalism. But we're in an era in which we we have to we have to look beyond other sources that would be useful in limiting the power of one individual to call out the armed forces of the Philippines, and then to quell insurrection and rebellion. Now, before I would conclude my answer to the question, another additional solution would be that you know we have to demilitarize, or to make the president as the titular commander-in-chief, but no actual power whatsoever in commanding armed forces. Now, what I'm talking here is parliamentary system. We would have a division of the roles of the head of state and the head of government. The head of state would be the ceremonial symbol of national unity, while the head of government, who would be the prime minister, he will be in charge of giving of giving direction or authorization to the operations that are handled by the military. And that is crucial for those like me who are supporting for parliamentary federalism with open FDI. And so we have to understand that we have to do away with a system that is already fragile in our democratic ideals, spirits, and aspirations as Filipinos. Make the cabinet and the prime minister as the non-titular commander-in-chief, and then they'll be the ones to give orders or to authorize power or authorize the armed forces of the Philippines to quell insurrection or rebellion, and also to declare martial law. Because under the parliamentary system, the ceremonial president would only attest the orders and the declarations that the prime minister and the cabinet would make. And so in the solution in making in making the declaration of martial law not abusive is to go to parliamentary system. Now, I have seen countless experiences coming from leaders in presidential systems such as Abraham Lincoln, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Park Chung-hee, and the other president in South Korea. I have seen them many times in my life. Even then, I'm a student of history, and now that would be a feasible solution in order to make declaration of martial law not abusive, which is to make the president as the commander-in-chief, but not have the power to declare martial law or to issue orders to the armed forces. It will be up to the prime minister and cabinet to decide. Thank you, and I rest my case.
Okay, thank you very much. So since we're already running out of time, so this is the last question. So nakapag-provide tayo ng link sa ating message box para makapag-vote yung ating mga audience to ascertain kung kaninong side yung mas persuasive. So while nagbo-vote yung ating audience, I will give the chance na makapagbigay kayo ng closing statement. So from the pro side, can I call on Mr. Lexter Michael to provide the closing statement?
All right. So with that said, so far the theme of this debate, as I've really expected, is the communist insurgency and the violence, but it's exactly the violence. So anyway, I'll just before that, that's exactly the thing that this debate I was really hoping for, and that we need to fight guns with guns or fist to fist, tooth to tooth, and etc. So I guess our side is very successful in truly defending it. That we need to fight rather than to negotiate or to do a soft talk with them. So since we're completely running out of time, so that's exactly what my closing statement is. So I rest my case for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for the side of the anti, kakarating lang din si Brother John Stephen Cuasay. You may now give your closing statement.
Hello, good morning po sa inyo lahat. Afternoon. Sa aking statement na pag hindi suporta sa martial law, I would like to say that this debate will be much better, and then ang masasabi ko lang po ay we want peace and do not make war, kasi po this solution destroys the society, the culture, and then the economically, in which our country slows the growth of the GDP, then the foreign investments, and then the value ng peso. Kailangan natin na i-open ng constitutional reform para ibalik sa dati ang ating economic prosperity. Yun lang.
Okay, so thank you very much. So nandito na tayo sa exciting side. Kanino kayang side yung mas naging persuasive sa ating audience? So I will now present my browser sa ating Google Form. At malalaman natin kung kanino yung naging persuasive. So i-refresh natin siya. Nakikita po ba yung screen? Check na dito, okay? Refresh lang natin saglit. Okay, refresh ko pa just to make sure. Okay, so ito, meron tayong 25 responses. So, dito tayo. And summary. Meron tayong 27, humabol. So, 77% ng ating respondents ay male and remaining 22% ay female. So, age group, 63% majority are coming from 18 to 30 years old. So, sumusunod sa majority ay below 18 years old. Ayan, so, island group. So, almost equal yung from Metro Manila and Luzon. Okay? Ayan, so, maraming single. So, yan, magligawan na kayo. Charot. So, so, professional status. Okay, so almost kalahati from mga college students, which is good. And pero-promote natin na itong intellectual culture dito sa Philippines. Yan, mga susunod na generation. Ayan, so among the arguments, which do you think is the most, okay, naging 28, may umabol. So which, naging 29, okay, sige. Pagbigyan natin, refresh natin ulit. May mga humabol. And stop natin accepting response. Yun na natin kung may significant change. Okay. 29 students all in all. Respondents. Ayan. So among the arguments, which do you think is the most persuasive? Meron tayong 29 responses and 72.4% yung in favor of martial law and 27.6% ng ating mga tagapakinig ay sinabi nilang against sa martial law. So with that, ayan, so thank you very much sa pag-attend. So for the last part ay ating pictorial. Okay, so for the moment. So yan, may I ask everyone to please turn on their cameras. Okay, so yung kaninang nakita nyong result is result lang from the 29 of our respondents out of sa 40 to 43 na nag-attend dito. So this is not the representative to the whole population. This may not be the representative to the whole population of the Philippines and also to the whole group. Okay, so ito lang is nakabase sa 29 na nagsagot. Okay, so can I ask everyone to please turn on their cameras? Yan. So count of 1, 2, 3. So one more. And 1, 2, 3. Okay, so thank you very much sa pagdalo. So hopefully, sana meron tayong another na nakaplano ng debate, which is ang topic is about corporal punishment. So itong corporal punishment ba o yung pagpalo o pag-abuso or pagpalo physically sa bata ay nakaka-contribute or nakakabuti ba sa pagdidisiplina sa well-being ng bata or hindi siya justified? So abangan natin yan. So once again, thank you very much. Ayan, so maraming salamat.
Guys.
Ayan. Salamat sa
pag-attend.
Twitters.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Congrats.
John, adios, mi
Peace to you
amigo.
all.
Okay.
Congratulations, John. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you po.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Susunod ulit.
I will end the formally end the Google meeting for this. Signing off. Thank you.
Thanks for the occasion, sirs.